Good evening and welcome to For Crying Out Loud, a live edition here on Blab TV channel 21. Tonight we're going to be talking to a very special guest, Dr. Scott Strader, and we're going to be talking about ADD and ADHD. Please do ring up with your questions. I shall give you the number a bit later on in the show, but first let me introduce my guest to you. Hi Scott, welcome for coming to me.
Thank you, great to be here.
I wanted to just clarify, because obviously from my point of view, I haven't heard so much about ADD or ADHD as I have since I've been here in the States. Yep. And so I'm just wondering, for people like me and others that maybe don't understand the difference between ADD and ADHD, if you could just sort of clarify that, please.
Sure, absolutely. Well, what we're talking about is a disorder primarily found in children, but also, as we'll talk, discovering more in adults, called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Right. That's what the ADHD stands for. Right. Now, ADHD can also be found as attention deficit disorder, which it's sometimes called, but really what we call it as psychologists is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right. And we're really either talking about an inattentive type or a hyperactive type.
Right.
Now, when we look for ADHD, what we're really looking for are three very important components of behavior, okay? And what we're doing is always observing behavior or asking parents or children about their behavior. And what we're looking for are three components: inattention, inability to sustain any kind of regular attention or focus on something. Mm-hmm. We're looking for hyperactive or overactive behavior. Mm-hmm. This is the behavior of the child who just can't seem to sit still and always seems to be moving around. And then the third component we look for is impulsivity, or an inability to really control one's thoughts, feelings into behavior. So being impulsive and not thinking before they act.
Do you, could some parents say that's little Johnny, or that's, because sometimes with your own children, I know my own children were younger and the way they were at times, I think, God, could they have been ADD? Obviously for some parents, what is really important is finding out what the difference is between having ADD or ADHD and that of just being a very hyperactive child running around everywhere driving the parents mad.
That's right.
So, what steps can parents do? What would they do if I came to you and said, look, I'm not sure, but I think, I may have a problem here. What will I do? What will happen next?
Sure. The first thing we're going to look for is kind of the impulsivity or the overactive child that's over and above what we would typically see in a child of a particular age.
Right.
So we kind of get a sense of what is typical for boys or girls at a particular age and say, well, Johnny may be a little bit more overactive than we expect. Yeah. So the process that we really go through is to get a very thorough history from the parents. Mm-hmm. When did the behavior start? Are there particular circumstances and environments where it exists versus where it doesn't exist? Mm-hmm. We're looking for outcomes such as, does it seem to be affecting the child's grades at school? Mm-hmm. Do they seem to be up out of their chair at school? Are they able to sit still in some environments but not in others? Again, looking at that environmental piece. So the first thing we're doing is taking a very important history.
But would that also include their diet? Because I do know that in some foods, obviously, there are all various colourings, and that might have an effect on some of the children as well. And would they be given advice on looking at the diet and how they could possibly cut out maybe certain things?
Well, we're always looking at all different components of behavior and all different things that may attribute to the behavior that we're seeing. Now, we don't have a lot of strong scientific evidence that suggests that one diet over another seems to create ADHD. Mm-hmm. Now, we know that we give a child a lot of sugar-based foods, that they're going to be hyperactive for a period of time. But even a consistent diet in that way doesn't seem to lend itself to the same kinds of things that we see in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So we may give some parents some advice about, let's try and restrict the diet of sugar, or maybe we should try these foods over those foods. But we haven't seen a strong scientific link that suggests that diet alone leads to something like ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends, doesn't it, on some
Always.
children. I do know that if you do cut out the colourings, they can actually calm down. For some children, it doesn't make any difference. So obviously that would then confirm that it's more than just that of their diet.
That's
but
right.
What about our genetics from our family? Is that something as well that, you know, either you would look at or is taken into consideration?
Sure.
You know, is there any sort of research on that?
Absolutely. Now, we're calling ADHD, really what we call it is a brain disorder or a neurological disorder. There seems to be some kind of component to brain structure or function. We don't really know exactly what that is, and it seems to take different forms in different children. But there certainly is a strong link to suggest that it's something certainly that has to do with the structure of the brain that seems to affect these kinds of children, or seems to affect children in these kinds of ways. Now, what we're also finding with that then is that if the parents tend to have more of that kind of history in their childhood, that it's more likely that we see it in the children.
Yeah.
Now, whether we don't have a direct genetic link yet, we can't say that it's this gene that causes ADHD, but we're certainly seeing a familial trend that suggests that if it's present in family members, it's more likely to be occurring in the child.
Oh, it's so interesting, you know, you hear so much about all the genetics and the DNA.
It's a very popular area to talk about right now.
I was trying to read up on it, and my mind was boggled by it all, and between the so many sort of like differences, and I kept saying, were drugs necessary? Is something that we really need to use? Because there are two particular drugs, isn't there, that they are treated with?
Yes. First, let me say that I think that this whole kind of knowledge base about ADD and ADHD is still growing.
Yeah.
We don't pretend to know everything that we need to know about ADHD, and that's why I think parents get frustrated sometimes, because they'll see 3 different professionals and get what they believe to be 3 different answers.
Yeah.
And it's because we're kind of still focused on what really causes ADHD and what treatments seem to be most effective.
Because it is relatively new, isn't it? I mean, obviously it's grown over the last 10 or 15 years, but the whole concept of this is relatively
correct. The whole
new.
concept of ADHD is really probably about 20 years old, maybe 25 years old. But really the bulk of our knowledge base about it is 10 to maybe 15 years old. But we've really, you know, our knowledge has come a long way in 10 years, but we're still not where we need to get to.
So, you know, a parent has come along to you and you've done these tests, and you feel that yes, they probably do have ADD or ADHD. What happens next? Are they immediately like, well, we're going to write a prescription and we're going to give them drugs? I mean, how does what would that be the case?
And again, to highlight what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, a thorough diagnostic process and an accurate diagnosis is so vitally important to then talking about what appropriate treatment is. So something even more than a doctor's visit is usually what I recommend. Psychologists such as myself have a battery of tests that we can administer to children, in addition to then collecting that thorough history that I talked about a few minutes ago, to really arrive at a good answer for the family.
So what is one of those tests?
Well, I wish there was one test that could give us that answer.
Yeah.
I usually look at things like intellectual functioning, so we'll do an intelligence test. We'll do a test that looks at academic achievement to see if there's any effect there. And then we also have some self-report measures that both the children and, depending on the age of the child, and the parents fill out, that then we can compare their responses to a history or a number of other people who have completed the test.
Well, I'm glad that you said with the parents as well, because I do think that's good that you know that you work together, and it's not just a case where we put Johnny there and then
I certainly understand that 2 hours with Johnny is not going to give me the kind of information that 12 years or even 6 years with Johnny from the parents
because
has.
obviously I take it then that when you do go ahead and you do the drugs and everything that you need to do in order to minister that it has to work, you know, side by side with the parents, because they may need some form of guidance.